The morning air was thick with the smell of wet earth and the faint tang of lilies from the funeral home. I had arrived hours early, clutching a bouquet of white roses, my hands trembling not just from grief, but from a sense of disbelief that the world could feel so cruel. Today was supposed to be the day I said goodbye to my husband, my anchor, my partner in every joy and sorrow. But the day already felt fractured, like glass about to cut. My parents were nowhere to be seen. I glanced around, hoping I had simply missed them in the crowd of mourners, the solemn faces, the low hum of whispered condolences. Nothing, my chest tightened. They must be stuck in traffic. I murmured to myself, but even as I spoke, the rationalization sounded hollow. Deep down, I knew that this absence wasn't accidental. The funeral director approached gently, a kind smile that did nothing to ease the ache in my heart. "Would you like to start the ceremony?" he asked. I nodded numbly, stepping forward, feeling the weight of the world pressing against my chest. The casket loomed ahead, polished oak that reflected my tear-streaked face. As I laid a hand on it, memories rushed in: his laugh in the kitchen at midnight, the way he held my hand when the world felt heavy, the warmth of his embrace during sleepless nights. And yet, among all these memories, there was an empty seat in my heart where my parents should have been. The betrayal cut deeper than the grief itself. They had chosen deliberately, I realized with a sinking horror, to skip this sacred day, not because of travel or illness, but to meet a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist. At a time when I had lost everything that mattered, they had chosen themselves, as always, over me. It wasn't the first time I had felt their cold distance, but until now, I had believed in their love, conditional, perhaps, but real. Now their absence was a verdict. They did not care enough to honor my husband, to honor me, to honor the life I had built. Their priorities, as always, were wrapped in secrecy and calculation. My blood ran cold. I sank into the nearest pew, my fingers gripping the edge so tightly they turned white. Around me, friends and distant relatives whispered words of comfort, but their voices felt distant, almost unreal. My thoughts were a storm of confusion and anger. What could possibly be so important that they would miss the funeral of the man I loved more than life itself? And then, like a knife twisting in a wound, the truth began to form. It wasn't that they were too busy. It wasn't that they were unaware. They had made a choice. A choice to be elsewhere. The ceremony began, the soft organ music filling the air, each note heavy with sorrow. I recited his favorite poem, my voice quivering, as if the words themselves carried the weight of betrayal. I imagined my parents sitting in a sterile office, nodding politely at someone who could never understand the depth of my loss, their faces composed, their concern entirely self-directed. It was almost laughable if it weren't so monstrous. As the coffin was lowered, I fought to hold back a scream. My knees felt weak, the world tilted, and my parents' absence became a tangible, suffocating presence in the air around me. I wanted to confront them, to demand why they had forsaken me on the most important day of my life. But there was nothing I could do now. They had acted, and I had been powerless to stop them. After the mourners drifted away, I remained by the graveside, rain beginning to fall in gentle, icy drops. I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and a nascent, simmering rage. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was betrayal crystallized into something sharp, something that would not be easily forgotten. Their choice had exposed them for what they truly were, and though I could not yet see the path forward, a single thought took root in the depths of my heart. This was not the end. I would remember, and one day they would understand the cost of their absence. The house was unbearably quiet when I returned from the funeral. Every corner seemed to echo with his absence, every shadow a reminder that my life had shifted into a world without him. I expected solace from my parents, a hug, a word of comfort, but the house was empty. A sticky note on the fridge, written in my mother's meticulous handwriting, simply read, "We had urgent matters. We'll discuss later." The words were cold, deliberate, almost mocking in their vagueness. I dropped my bag by the door, my hands shaking. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make them feel even a fraction of the hurt they had caused me. But instead, I moved through the house in a daze, noticing things I had never paid attention to before. The emails left open on the family computer, the subtle absence of letters or cards that usually arrived from distant relatives, everything felt like a carefully orchestrated vacuum, a space deliberately cleared of warmth. It was then that the whispers began. Small, almost imperceptible at first, the faint rustle of paper from my father's study, the soft vibration of a phone left forgotten on a table. I thought perhaps I was imagining it, that grief was twisting my mind. But when I glanced at the notifications on my phone, I saw them. Unfamiliar numbers, cryptic messages, and one email from a lawyer I had never heard of. Your husband's estate needs immediate attention. Contact us before it's too late. Panic prickled my skin. I tried to call my parents, but the line went straight to voicemail. Each unanswered call felt like confirmation. They had planned this. They had done more than skip the funeral. They had used it as a cover for something darker, something calculated. I spent the night pacing the living room, the rain tapping against the windows like the steady heartbeat of my anger. Memories of my parents' subtle criticisms, the way they always seemed to undermine his achievements, the faint, almost imperceptible delight they took in controlling my life, all of it clicked into place. Their love had never been unconditional. Their support had always been transactional. And now, in the wake of his death, I could see the depth of their coldness in stark relief. The next morning, I found myself rifling through drawers and files, something I had never done before. Each paper, each account statement, each note from a doctor or lawyer felt like a piece of a puzzle I hadn't known I was assembling. The psychiatrist appointment they had so meticulously planned for the day of the funeral was no accident. It wasn't for me, it wasn't even for my emotional well-being. It was for them, a move in a game I hadn't realized I was even part of. A sense of paranoia settled over me. I began noticing patterns in the past few months, subtle manipulations, decisions they had influenced, advice that now seemed sinister in hindsight. Every conversation with them had been a carefully laid thread, every disagreement a distraction, every gesture of affection a trap. Their absence at the funeral was not neglect, it was strategy, fear mixed with anger, a strange, intoxicating cocktail. I realized that their control had always been about more than just influence. It was about ownership. And in that realization, the first flicker of resolve ignited. I could not undo the past, and I could not bring him back, but I could understand them. I could expose them. Late that night, I sat by the window, watching the shadows of the trees dance across the floor. My grief had transformed into something sharper, something that demanded justice. I could feel it curling through me, a quiet promise to myself. I would not allow them to dictate the terms of my life any longer. I would uncover their plan, piece by piece, and when I did, they would face the consequences of their cruelty. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by whispers and shadows, but with it came clarity. I would not break, I would not collapse under their schemes. They had underestimated me, as they always had. And when the time came, I would make them understand that the daughter they thought they could manipulate had learned the rules of their game, and she was ready to play. For the first time since his death, I felt the pulse of something fierce and relentless. Grief still weighed heavily on me, but alongside it burned a cold, determined flame. The game had begun, and I would not lose. The next morning, I decided I could no longer wait in uncertainty. Every corner of the house seemed tainted by their absence, every familiar object now suspicious. I began to dig. Files, letters, phone records, anything that might reveal the truth. What I uncovered made my blood run cold. It started with the bank statements, withdrawals I hadn't authorized, transfers made without explanation, and a sudden appearance of documents from my husband's estate. My parents' names were tied to everything. They had used the guise of the psychiatrist appointment to cover a meeting with lawyers, financial advisors, anyone who could help them secure control over my life and my husband's estate. The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. They hadn't just ignored me at my most vulnerable, they had plotted against me quietly, meticulously. Every concerned call they had ever made, Every time they insisted I think logically, instead of following my heart, it had all been preparation. They had groomed me to be dependent, malleable, controllable, and now that the person who had truly loved and supported me was gone, they saw an opportunity to take everything for themselves. I remembered snippets of conversations I had once dismissed, my mother's quiet suggestion that my husband wasn't ambitious enough, my father's subtle warning that I should focus on family priorities. At the time, I had brushed them off as meddling, normal parental interference. But now, in the harsh light of grief and betrayal, it became clear it had all been a strategic plan. A sense of fury unlike anything I had ever known took hold. I felt the icy grip of betrayal tighten around my chest, but alongside it, a new clarity emerged. This was no longer just about mourning. This was about survival, psychological, emotional, and even financial. They had underestimated me, and that would be their greatest mistake. I confronted them directly. The first call went unanswered, the second sent to voicemail. I drove to their house, heart pounding, hands gripping the steering wheel until the knuckles turned white. When I arrived, the polished smiles and calm demeanor I had once trusted were gone, replaced by a faint flicker of unease, a shadow of recognition that perhaps I had seen through them. "I know what you've been doing," I said, my voice trembling with fury. The funeral, the lawyer, the transfers, everything. They exchanged glances, their faces carefully composed. My mother's lips curved into a polite smile, as if I were discussing the weather. "You're overreacting," she said smoothly. "We were only trying to help you. Help me," I repeated, my voice rising. "By skipping the one day that mattered most, by manipulating my life while I grieve, by trying to take what belonged to him to me." For the first time, I saw a crack in their armor. My father's eyes flickered, a momentary hesitation. They had always believed I was weak, that grief would leave me pliable, desperate for their approval. But grief had not broken me. It had forged something sharper, colder, more dangerous. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I simply told them everything I had discovered, piece by piece, letting the truth hang in the air between us like a guillotine blade. Their silence was almost deafening. I could see the calculations behind their eyes, the attempts to maintain control slipping away. When I left, I didn't look back, but I felt the beginnings of a plan taking shape in my mind, cold and meticulous like theirs. They had thought they could manipulate, control, and dominate, but I was ready to turn the tables. Every word, every movement, every subtle gesture would be measured and deliberate. I would expose them for the cold, calculating people they truly were, and I would make them pay, not with violence, but with the justice of truth. As I drove home through the gray drizzle, my heart thrummed not with grief, but with a pulse of determination. The first stage of understanding was complete. I knew what they had done, and I knew what they intended. And now it was my turn. This was no longer about sorrow. It was about strategy. It was about betrayal. And it was about revenge. The first step in my plan was patience. I couldn't allow rage to blind me. I needed precision, the same meticulousness my parents had always prided themselves on. Every move they had made had been calculated. Every word spoken, every subtle manipulation had been a trap. Now it was my turn to play the game on my own terms. I began quietly, observing them from a distance, listening for slips, collecting evidence. Emails, bank transfers, medical records, even casual remarks in conversation, each one became a thread I could pull. The realization that they thought me powerless had fueled me. They underestimated the depth of my grief, the clarity it had forged in me. Where sorrow had threatened to break me, it had instead sharpened my mind, honed my focus. I started with their social circle. Friends and acquaintances, who had once admired their outward charm, were given subtle truths I had discovered, planted like seeds in fertile soil. At first, the murmurs were quiet, easily dismissed. But with each confirmation, each corroboration of the cold, manipulative behaviors, the whispers grew into a tide that could no longer be contained. People began questioning them, their motives, their integrity, their character. Next, I targeted their financial maneuverings. I contacted the lawyers, the bankers, and the advisors who had helped orchestrate their schemes. I presented them with the facts, the proof, and the timelines. Each document I produced was precise, undeniable, leaving no room for excuses. My parents had always believed that money could silence scrutiny, that influence could protect them. But they hadn't counted on me to expose them so thoroughly. When the first calls came from their lawyers, my heart soared in quiet triumph. The shock on their faces when they realized the net was closing in was almost poetic. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to confront them with violence or anger. The cold, relentless truth was already working. Their carefully constructed world, the one they had built to control me, was crumbling, brick by brick. But the sweetest moment came during a family gathering I had orchestrated under the guise of reconciliation. Friends, distant relatives, even colleagues of my parents were present. I spoke gently at first, recalling the past with the calm precision of someone who knows every detail. Then, layer by layer, I revealed the evidence, letting each piece land like a stone on the table. The shock on their faces, the discomfort in their eyes, was delicious in its inevitability. "You thought you could manipulate me," I said softly, my voice steady. "You thought that grief would leave me weak, pliable, obedient, but you miscalculated. You misjudged the strength that comes from love and the clarity that comes from betrayal." Their silence was absolute. No words, no defenses, only the weight of exposure pressing down on them. And in that silence, I found a strange satisfaction, not the thrill of vengeance itself, but the justice of truth. They had taken what they wanted, but they had failed to anticipate the consequences of underestimating me. Afterward, I watched them retreat into a world stripped of the facades they had relied upon. Friends questioned them, their influence waned, and the family business, once seemingly untouchable, faced scrutiny and setbacks. And I reclaimed my life, piece by piece. I didn't need to destroy them entirely. Their own actions had done that. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe, to feel grief without the crushing weight of betrayal. I visited his grave again, laying fresh flowers and whispering words I had kept inside for too long. I had loved fiercely, lost painfully, and survived. The cold fire of revenge had tempered me, shaped me, but it hadn't consumed me. I realized as I stood there in the soft sunlight breaking through the clouds, that true power lay not in vengeance alone, but in the reclamation of self. I had taken back my life, my dignity, my voice. My parents had tried to control my world, but I had rewritten the rules. As I walked away, a sense of peace settled over me. The past still bore scars, the memory of betrayal still stung, but it no longer dictated the course of my life. The game had ended, and I had won not with cruelty, but with clarity, with strategy, and with the unshakable knowledge that I would never allow anyone to wield such control over me again. Theirs was a lesson paid for in full, and mine was freedom, derned, bitter, sweet, and utterly mine.